Hello students, this is your midterm exam review video. So I'm going to go through the slideshow for you and highlight important parts of the chapters that you've read and the extra readings that I gave you that were part of the curriculum for the course, and highlight other important things that I know you need to focus on to be properly prepared for the exam. So first of all, we will start off with the midterm exam design. So you will be able to access the exam at 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday. You will have until 11:59 p.m. on Friday to finish it. So the exam shows up in the left-hand sidebar of the Learn site, and it just shows up like any other assignment does. As of 9 a.m. on Friday, you'll be able to access the PDF of the exam, and you'll just download that onto your home computer, and you'll open it up, and if you know how to modify a PDF document, you can just do that there and resave it with your last name as the first word in the file name for when you upload it. If you want to work with it in Word, you just need to highlight all of the content and paste it into a Word document, and then you can highlight the answers for the multiple choice section and include the wording for the short answer section. So the exam will include 20 multiple choice questions and then 4 short answer questions, and each short answer will have 20 points of value. I want you to bear in mind as you're preparing for the exam and when you go into the exam what the overarching themes of our course are. We have been focusing on learning what technical communicators do and how they do it and what concerns need to be top of mind for them in their profession. What kind of documents do technical communicators create? How do they create them? What design principles prevail when they create them? How do they go about making the documents they create most usable for the audiences they're trying to reach and serve? And finally, who do technical communicators work with? That's a very interesting question, and we've addressed it in a number of ways so far this semester. So now, jumping in here, this review is going to pace you through the chapters and the articles that you've read and note some highlights. I want you to take notes as you're watching this video and then use these notes alongside whatever notes you've already compiled from the chapters that you've read. Go back through your Markel book and look at the highlighting you've done or notes you've written in the margin, and then kind of collate the notes you take from this video with the notes you've already had, and then you'll probably land upon the really important material from the class. Don't forget all of the assigned material that has not been in the textbook. That is also covered in the exam. Pay special attention in your studying to images, specifically images of famous graphics that we covered when we were preparing for the data visualization assignment. And don't forget also to review the Intercom article that concerns the 9 competencies that undergird the profession and that are the components of the foundation exam. And I've included a little image here on the slide that I'm circling right now of the graphic that's in the Intercom article that talks about those 9 areas of competency. Okay, so chapter 1 concerned the documents that technical and professional communicators create and the special concerns that technical communicators have to have with regard to audience and purpose and usability. Usability is a term that goes hand in hand with accessibility, so documents need to be usable both in terms of their information and in terms of sort of the context in which they're used. Whether it's on a mobile phone screen or out in the rain or whatever it happens to be. But usability also means that it has to be usable to various kinds of audiences, whether those are audiences, say, with a certain physical special need or audiences from a particular culture. These are all concerns that are unfolded within the term of accessibility. Audience and purpose are 2 terms that are repeated over and over again in the technical and professional communication curriculum. So on page 7, there's a list of documents' 6 major characteristics, and you're going to want to pay attention to what is listed there in that list. I'm going to go through pretty quickly, so hopefully you're pausing the video to finish taking notes on each slide. Chapters 14 and 15 are what we read next. Chapter 14 concerned formats of documents of correspondence, and that included memoranda. and emails, and the chapter also addressed the needs of multicultural readers. Now, what they mean by multicultural in this context is readers from different cultures. So if you create one document, is it necessarily going to serve readers who are not in the home culture out of which the document is created? If you're applying for a job for an international company, you need to know what the expectations are and if they're different with regard to a salutation or something as simple as whether you include a picture in your resume. So those are just two examples of kind of work applying documents, but there are examples throughout the technical and professional communication realm of making sure that your documents are appropriate for the culture to whom they're addressed. Number 15, chapter 15, specifically concerned job materials, including resumes. And I created a video for you all that also went over this material. And many of you struggled a little bit with glyph usage and tab alignment usage in your resumes, so I'd like you to revisit that information. So glyphs are whatever little icons you use to enforce information in a document. The most famous one, or the most well-recognized one, of course, is a bullet point. And that information is stressed in chapter 15. So there are strategies this chapter 15 raises for elaborating on your education section of your resume. Also, the chapter considers templates, so how you plan and draft from a template doc and how you modify it, what the benefits are of following these models and what the benefits are of modifying them to suit your needs. So moving right along, we have chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2, and I created a video for you concerning this, concerned ethics and ethical culture within organizations. You need to consider what your obligations are as an employee. Who are you obligated to serve? And I stressed this with great fervor, I suppose, in the video that I created for you. And you also wrote about this to a degree in the discussion board. So that is really important and interesting content to me. So hopefully it resonates in its interestingness to you when you review it. Chapter 3 concerned the writing process. I noted in the video that I created that whatever writing situation you're in, whether it was a writing situation in high school or in a previous core writing course, there is a writing process that was surely described to you that contains component parts. So technical writers also go through a process when they're planning, designing, drafting, editing, revising, and releasing the sort of documents or documentation that they are crafting. So remind yourself what the unique aspects of this process are for technical communicators. Okay, so please don't forget that you read 2 articles about the history of technical and professional communication. There was the Durack article, which asks the question, sort of in general, why is inquiring into the margins, quote unquote, of technical and professional communication necessary? She's specifically looking at women's history in the field of technical and professional communication, gender, technology, and the history of technical communication. You'll see that's the article that I've included a screenshot of right here. And then the other article by O'Hara is more a historical view of what are the ancestors of what today is an academic discipline of technical and professional communication, and what the history of that academic field is. What are some important evolutionary moments in science and defense history that have important resonance with technical and professional communication as a field? So don't forget to review those 2 articles. Okay, so now moving on to chapter 5. Chapter 5 really doubled down once again on these concepts of audience and purpose. So think about how the textbook asks you to develop strategies to get to know your audience. So your purpose is what you want to accomplish with your document. So how is your purpose related to your audience? That's a very important question to ask yourself. So think about what structured ways and unstructured ways are for getting to know your audience. Some structured ones would be an audience profile sheet. An unstructured one might be just researching online or reading about your audience and interviewing. And Clint Lanier also talks about interviewing in the video that you watched. So take a look on pages 87 and 88 in your review as to what the 6 factors are that you should consider about your reader's characteristics. You need to ask why your reader is reading, where they are reading. I just mentioned a few minutes ago, are they reading in the rain? Are they reading in the dark? Are they reading on a phone? What are those situations? What are the cross-cultural concerns that you should consider? And if you're revising a document, like if you have, let's say, a user manual, and you are revising it for a new audience and a new purpose, what changes might be required? These are very important questions for technical communicators to ask themselves in the document development process. So moving on to Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is maybe the most memorable thing for you of recent experience because it concerned creating graphics. So graphics are the pictures in technical communication, and hopefully you can easily answer the question, what are the function of graphics? So there are 5 bullet points on page 296, and I want you to be able to answer the question, what are the characteristics of an effective graphic? So there are 5 bullet points on page 297 that are also worth reviewing. What concerns are there regarding ethics and honesty with regard to creating graphics? So certain graphic types, that can be a pie chart or a bar chart, are easy to manipulate the visual impact of by using certain design flourishes that might come in a software package. One of the famous ones is adding a 3D effect or adding an angle. So with a pie chart in particular, if you created at an angle, the pie pieces in the foreground look larger than the ones in the background proportionally, just because of the angle at which the image is tilted, which is something that certain graphic creation software will ask you if you want to do. On a bar chart, you can create a 3D effect, but often it's more confusing than it is serving the purpose of the conveying of information. So people need to ask themselves when they're creating graphics really important questions about their audience, their purpose, the kind of information they're sharing, the physical condition and time, money, equipment, and expertise that they have available to them when their team, for example, in a workplace setting, is tasked with creating graphics. These are all concerns and considerations. Also, the designers of graphics need to consider using color. So if somebody is colorblind, are they going to be able to read the colors in your graphic? There are many different kinds of color blindness, and there are tools available online that allow you to test your graphics for colorblind friendliness. Also, are the colors you're using too associated with certain emotions, or are they powerful in certain cultures in a way that you don't necessarily want these colors to be? So now we're going to turn to the next slide, which concerns Edward Tufte, and I gave you a chapter from his book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, which is up here in the slide. And then the Stephen Few article talked about sort of a debate that is raged, I suppose that's one way of putting it, concerning chart junk. Now, be familiar with these debates. Edward Tufte is a really important name in the field of visualizations of data. I mentioned that to you earlier this semester in a video. So Stephen Few, to remind you, his report considers the debate about Tufte's coined term, chart junk. So you should be able to define that term and tell me what that debate is all about. I want you to wonder, can you envision why people are vulnerable to creating graphics that contain chart junk? So in Tufte's reading, some ideas on the first page, they resonate. So graphical displays, this is on the first page of his chapter. He says graphical displays should show the data. That's sort of his overarching principle. Sometimes they reveal data that might otherwise be hard to discern. He wants to show examples in that chapter of just how good statistical graphics can be. That's a quote from his chapter, including, quote, data maps, time series, narrative designs, and relational graphics, end quote. So data maps, he says, can carry a huge volume of data, but what are some of the problems with data maps? He goes into that in the chapter. And one of the things he says is they may reflect varying diagnostic customs and fads rather than actual differences in rates. So those diagnostic differences are important, but they're perhaps elided by the graphic itself. So for Tufte, the principles of graphical excellence are, as he says, a matter of substance, statistics, and design. So the least amount of data ink, the least amount of ink in the least amount of space should be used. That's his principle. And there are two other terms of his, which I haven't mentioned to you before, I don't think, but they're data ink and lie factor. I'm just sort of throwing those out there in this review because they're also important terms associated with Tufte. In this slide, I've included a few images that are important. So I want you to be able to recognize these, the kinds of graphics that they are, and how they succeed or how they fail. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so the next slide concerns Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 concerns communicating persuasively. It's a matter of connecting with your audience, but there are considerations. You must abide by ethics, law, politics, information, personnel, finance, and time constraints. Those are all the various kinds of constraints that have an impact on your communication approaches, and those are on 174 or 175. So what kinds of evidence do technical communicators use? Most people who create some kind of argument, we would hope, have evidence, right, to back it up. So common sense arguments are one kind of support that a technical communicator might use as evidence. Numerical data is another kind, examples and expert testimony. In your data visualization project, hopefully you came to the understanding that in many reports, if you looked at examples, the ones I showed in the video, sometimes they point out how their graphics weren't as strong as they could have been. So like deferring to another possible way of doing something. Part of that project was pointing out how maybe the original data set wasn't as strong as it could be. That was your raison d'etre for creating the new data visualizations, was acknowledging that sometimes a representation of data isn't as powerful or as impactful as it could be. So Markel discusses in Chapter 8 that you have to be responsible, however, when presenting information. Obviously, many people are inclined to appeal to emotion. That's an appeal to pathos. And when you do that, you're vulnerable to including logical fallacies. They often slip into documents and arguments when the appeal to emotion carries one away. So there's a big list on 183 to 184 of logical fallacies, and you've probably become familiar with these in other core writing classes, but remind yourself of them. They are both fallacious and unethical. So they're fallacious, meaning they are fallacies, they are falsehoods. They're not like watertight argumentative approaches, but they're also unethical because they have tactics of manipulation or untruth built into them. So graphics are indeed persuasive, as are words, but you need to think of graphics also as operating through the classical rhetorical appeals, which are ethos, logos, and pathos. And I already mentioned pathos. So graphical design elements combine to create convincing documents alongside these kinds of appeals. And finally, this is the last slide. Chapter 9 discussed the ways of emphasizing important information, just sort of from a design and a visual approach. So how do we design our documents in such a way that important information stands out? Well, we create titles and headings and lists, and we use fonts, font face and size and style. We use glyphs, I already mentioned glyphs in this video, and we use font emphasis usefully to draw attention to information. That could be bolding, that could be italics, underlining in certain situations. Also, you need to be sure at the same time when you're trying to emphasize information that your sentences are fulfilling that purpose. So If a sentence is so long that the information that's important in it gets lost, then you'll want to convert that sentence into a list. And Chapter 9 goes through that information and what the best way to create a list is. So you would ensure that your sentences, if it's a long sentence that contains an embedded list bounded by commas within it, that all of the aspects are parallel, and the proper punctuation is used. In a paragraph, you'd want to repeat key words, and throughout a document, the repetition of keywords can create unity and coherence across the whole document. So that's the last chapter that you read in your textbook in preparation for the midterm. Remind yourself that you have a whole series of videos that I've created for you, and you've done a lot of posting on the discussion board, and you've completed a couple of important assignments so far. So I'm going to sign off now because this review video has been plenty long, but maybe you'll want to watch it more than once. In order to be prepared for the exam, which begins at 9 a.m. on Friday, at least by begins, I mean it's available to you. You can take however much time you need on it between 9 a.m. and the deadline of 11:59 p.m. on Friday. But be sure that you upload it back to Learn by 11:59 p.m. on Friday in a document that has your last name as the first word in the file name. Please let me know if you have any questions.